During this time of limited travel, increased isolation, and stressful media, we want to make the most of this time right here at home.
Let us be your escape from life's monotony. Allow yourself to indulge in your wildest travel fantasies and discover the constant beauty of this ever-changing world with the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. On today's episode, bonjour et bienvenue à the sights, culture, and food of France with a very special guest.
Welcome to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. We're your navigators, Allison
and Regan. And today we'll be diving into the culture and history of France. So we're jumping back to Europe for another episode here. And we have a very special guest who you will get to meet very shortly. But first, we're going to head off with our icebreaker, as always. So today's question is, who is your favorite author? Allie, you want to give us your answer?
Yes. So as you know from previous episodes, I am reading the Hunger Games series again, but it's not my favorite author. My favorite author is John Green. If you've read Paper Towns or The Fault in Our Stars, he is the author of those fabulous books and many others, but those are probably my top two favorite books of his. How about you, Regan?
Yeah, I just recently became a quote unquote reader again. And most recently I read Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, and it blew my mind. Like, I also had nightmares, but I kind of liked that about it. And I just think she's a brilliant writer. And I just love the like thriller fiction genre generally. So I think I'd have to go with her at this moment in time. So then, as I mentioned, we have a special guest, and I would love to get his answer on this because he was my history teacher in high school, and I know he has such knowledge to share with us. So, Todd Bensley, who is your favorite author?
Stephen Levitt. He's the author of Freakonomics. I just love that he gives me an opportunity to think about things in new and interesting ways. And I would recommend Freakonomics and any of his other books to the listeners out there. Just, especially if you're looking for a new way to look at old things, it's definitely a good read.
Sounds good. That kind of gives us a good little glimpse into more about Todd, which is weird to call him Todd since he's my dad. So today we have Todd Bensley, as Regan has already stated, and he was born and raised in Medina, New York, as well as Regan and I. So he has an amazing family that I just so happen to be a part of, and he loves to travel and experience new things. He loves all things history, especially local history. And then when his family doesn't know where he is, we can usually find him at Boxwood Cemetery in Medina. And he has a passion to preserve the cemetery and the stories of the people buried there. He actually has a book all about it. So if you want more information on that, we would be happy to share his book details with you. And he is a U.S. history teacher, like Regan has stated. He was a teacher for both of us. He teaches U.S. history, government and economics, and he works at our local public school. And some fun facts about him: he has been to 16 countries and 39 states. Some of them he's been to multiple times. He hiked 27 of the 46 high peaks in the Adirondacks, and he loves to read. So welcome, Todd.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about France and all things travel. I've really enjoyed your podcast series so far.
So first question here, what made you choose to go to France, and what was your planning process like for your trip?
So I had set a goal for myself to go to Europe by the time I was 40. So I had to find a way to fulfill that goal, that bucket list. And it was going to be too expensive for my whole family to go, but I couldn't leave them home. I can't say, hey, I'm going to Europe and we'll see you later. So I had to find an alternative way to make that happen. So I started looking around, and I found that there was this company called EF Tours. It's one of many that set up student trips. And I also found out that we would be able to earn free spots if we were able to recruit a certain number of people. So once we decided we were going to do the trip and my wife agreed to go along with the trip, we started trying to figure out where we were going to go. And obviously, we're looking for a place that is going to appeal to a lot of people. And who doesn't want to go to Paris, France? So we made that our target. And then from there, we kind of figured out different itineraries that might help us to interest other people to go. And it turns out quite a few people were interested. We ended up taking 30 people besides my family of four to France and then to Italy as well. And that was able to actually earn us 4 free spots. So my whole family got to go for free. And we had done such a good job of recruiting that they actually gave us $2,000 in spending money for that first trip. So that was just, it was amazing. And we had a great time and knew we wanted to go back again.
Awesome. So I have been on a couple of these trips, but what places in France have you been to specifically? Because it's not just Paris. We know you've been to, well, I know that you've been to other places. So I want to give us an idea of those exact places you've been to in France.
Right. So most of these places I've only been to once, but I have had the good fortune of being to Paris 5 times, which is amazing. You're going to find out that I don't really speak French, just like the ladies don't speak Icelandic. But
Hey.
we've been to Chartres, the Loire Valley, to see a number of the chateaus. Giverny, which is Monet's home, where the famous water lilies was painted. We've been to Nice and Cannes in the south, Saint Malo and Mont Saint Michel to the west, and Cannes, Omaha Beach, Juno Beach, and Rouen, all in the north, all associated with the D-Day invasions of Normandy, which obviously has a strong appeal to me.
That's so awesome. Like most of my knowledge of France, I mean, other than like my high school European history class and things like that, is from the TV show Emily in Paris, which I love. I know there's a lot of flack coming from it, but like you hear about things like the chateaus and all of these places in Paris. So I'm so excited to dive deeper into these places that I so badly want to go. So can you give us a little bit of an overview of your experience? Like how long you were there for, where you stayed? Like we've talked a lot about Airbnb, hotel. What were your experiences over in France?
Yeah, so we our trips were typically about 8 to 10 days, long enough to be able to experience some things, but not too long for the students to get homesick and all that. But really, you need at least a week to go over. By the time you get there, get settled in and everything, you'd want to have at least a week to be able to go around and do some of the things that you want to do, because you're even in that time not going to get to do half of what you want to do. So generally, we ended up staying in hotels that catered to student groups. Some were literally dorm-like, bunk beds and everything else, while others were more traditional hotels. But when I say traditional hotels, not traditional in the sense of American hotels, certainly they in some ways look like American hotels, but they didn't have all the amenities that we were used to in America. The rooms were usually very tiny, not much more than a bed, and obviously a bathroom as well. And in most of them, sometimes we had to share bathrooms. No air conditioning in most of them, and most of them didn't even have elevators, because a lot of these are in buildings that are hundreds of years old, and to retrofit them with some sort of an elevator just wasn't going to work. So there were numerous times that we were lugging luggage 3-4 flights of stairs just to get up to our rooms. So still very nice, but not with all the amenities that we're used to here in America with our hotels.
Yeah, so speaking of like hotels and how things are different, I remember the first time we brought gigantic suitcases and we quickly realized this is not America and there's no elevator. So we were hauling these ginormous suitcases up these stairs. So just to insert a little of my own advice, bring a carry-on suitcase if you can, because you don't want to be lugging around a heavy suitcase up those stairs. So that brings us into the cultural aspect of this podcast. And how would you say that French culture differs from the US culture?
I mean, obviously, French culture is much older than U.S. culture, and they do really respect their past, from what I've seen. but they don't live in the past. They live in mostly in the present, somewhat in the future. But they also tend to be much more laid back. If you're heading out to a cafe, usually in the United States, it's like, let's get this done and on to the next thing. But in France, they would literally sit in their cafes for hours, sipping their coffees and having their pastries and such.
I always see like the stereotypical patio style cafe. Did you see those everywhere, or is that just an in the movies sort of thing?
Yeah, no, it's everywhere. And that's one thing that I was hoping that we would adopt more of here in the States once the pandemic hit, because, in a lot of places, cities, small towns, we really don't have much outdoor space. But in Europe, they literally will block off half a street just so that they can have the outdoor space for the cafes and all that. They'll make them one-way streets or maybe just pedestrian streets, just so that they have those opportunities. And it's a great thing for the businesses because they don't have to have that square footage inside their business that they're paying for seating. But it's also wonderful for the people who want to, sit outside and enjoy the view of the street that they're on and, feel safe as well. So yeah, that's definitely not just a stereotype. That's certainly the way it was in a lot of places we went.
But speaking of some of these stereotypes, and there's a lot of them that are brought up in movies, particularly French attitudes towards other people, specifically Americans. But were there any stereotypes that we have in the United States that were debunked or corrected for you during your travels?
Yeah, I mean, it was that exact stereotype that you talked about. I mean, before we went, all I heard about was how rude the French people were going to be. I still hear that. I found it to be just the opposite. The one tip that I did receive was that sometimes that's attributed to the fact that the Americans will walk into a store or whatever and just start speaking English and expect that the French are going to speak English to them. So one tip that I heard early on was to at least try to engage in a little bit of French, no matter how poor your French is, and mine is very poor. And that seemed to do the trick. I mean, you'd say bonjour, and immediately they'd be like, oh, this guy doesn't know any French. So they would switch over to English, which makes some sense, even if they didn't know that I was, an English speaking person. So many of the people around the world, that's their second or third language. So it makes sense for the people, especially in the tourist areas, to know English. But like I said, we did not see anything of that nature of rude people. I mean, obviously, you can find a rude person here and there anywhere in the world, but we did not see that. I think that's one of the big myths that needs to be broken because I would hope it wouldn't hold anyone back from going to France because we've had nothing but great experiences with the people of France.
Yeah, definitely all about debunking the stereotypes here on this podcast, but we kind of have to talk about some stereotypes and the staples that are French food and the culture in France. What would you say are some of the staples? And maybe there are stereotypes and maybe there are some that aren't so stereotypical. And then would you like to talk about some of your favorites?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if you've ever seen a movie or anything about France, you see the pastry shops, you see, the people carrying their loaves of French bread and their cheese as well. Now, maybe it's just because those are some of my favorites, but those are what stick out to me as French food. But also, I mean, obviously, the French are known for their wines as well, and it's very regional, just like in many other parts of the world. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a French cuisine. There's many French cuisines depending on, if you're close to the sea, if you're not close to the sea. They have many different regional variations on their food and that. So we loved going to, an open air market and picking up some cheese and some bread and such and being able to just kind of use that as our lunch. We've done that a few different times. And I mean, it's very idyllic. Now, as far as getting to my favorite foods, I'm glad you asked me that. I didn't have to pick just one. But crepes of all variety certainly are good. Chocolate-filled croissants, which I had never had before. Gelato, of course, even though we associate gelato with Italy. that wherever we were on a quest for gelato. No matter what country we were in, we could find gelato somewhere in Europe. And then a sandwich called a croque monsieur sandwich. And I'm not sure if it's just because of the fact I was very hungry when we were visiting the palace at Versailles, but I had my first croque monsieur outside of Versailles Palace, and I fell in love with the sandwich right away. It's basically a ham and cheese sandwich, but there's cheese on the inside, as well as bechamel sauce, a ham, and then on the outside, because there's not enough cheese, they just put more cheese on it.
I'm dying over here. I am just so hungry talking about all of these things. I've tried some of them. Like I had a croque monsieur. My French also as good as my Icelandic, but I tried one at Be Our Guest restaurant in Disney World. Shocking. And I agree. It was delicious. It seems so simple, but yet amazing. So,
Yeah.
Oh, I could talk about food all day, but we do want to know a lot more about your experiences. So, as you're a history teacher, what was it like to go to the places that you teach about in your classes or learned about in classes?
It was such an amazing experience. Getting to experience it with my family and also with some of my students has been really great. Even my students who haven't been able to go on the trip, I feel have benefited from it because of my own firsthand knowledge of what's there. I mean, you go to the Hall of Mirrors where the Treaty of Versailles is signed to end World War I, and you can tell the students, what an amazing place it is to be there. So, and all the different treaties that have been signed. I mean, I always make a joke every year in my classes. It's like, oh, the leaders are off to Paris again to sign a treaty. It seemed like, every war ended with a treaty in Paris. And I don't think they started the wars to be able to go to Paris to have a treaty signing, but it certainly seemed like they were always gung-ho to get to Paris to sign a treaty at some point. So, and being there, I know why they do it. I mean, I would love to go back to Paris and anywhere in France, actually, as soon as I get a chance to go.
Yeah, so I think you already highlighted some of this with that past answer, but can you tell us a little bit about some of your favorite memories, maybe one specifically in Paris or all over France?
Yeah, I mean, there's a long list I've got. Seeing the Eiffel Tower for the first time. I mean, having spent a whole lifetime of seeing the images, not only in history books, but in movies and TV shows and everything. I mean, I think that's one of the first things that people think about if they think about Paris. We went on a river tour on the Seine, and we didn't know it, but at 10 o'clock at night, they start to light the Eiffel Tower on the hour, and sometimes it's different colors, trying to honor something. It twinkles. It's really an amazing sight to see, both in the daytime and at night. Obviously, going to the Louvre Museum as well, seeing all the famous artworks. But one of the things that really shocked me was the first time we saw the Mona Lisa. I mean, the Mona Lisa is like obviously very famous artwork, and you're expecting this big grand painting, and you get there and it's the tiniest little painting you've ever seen. Just about it was amazing how small it actually was. And you can't get close because they've got so many people that are trying to see it all at the same time. So it was very interesting. Then Notre Dame Cathedral, my heart just broke when I saw it in flames a few years ago. It just, the fact that it might not exist anymore was just heartbreaking to see that. But I'm so thankful that I got to go before the restoration of it. Happy that they are restoring it, and I can't wait to go and see it again. But I always loved, usually right after we left Notre Dame, we had some free time, and we would almost always head over to the left bank to head into the little area where there's little tiny streets, very narrow streets, but little shops. We'd grab a baguette sandwich and have our lunch there, whatever. And I really always look forward to that. Another experience, taking the Channel, one of our trips. Most of our trips were not just to France. We did have one trip that was exclusively France, but others included other countries as well. We got to take the Channel train from London to Paris, which was really cool to be able to do that. an engineering marvel, and it was pretty neat to be able to experience that. The beaches of Normandy. I mean, a history teacher, how can you not love the beaches of Normandy? All the history there with D-Day, it's incredible. We spent time on the beach, so you could look from the American perspective to see what was in front of them, which was sheer cliffs, which was just seemed like it was impossible to break through. And then we see it from the German perspective. There's actually places where you can go and you can see where the German pillboxes are, where they were, hiding out and being able to shoot at the Americans from. And it gave me a whole new appreciation. I mean, I already had a big appreciation, but it gave me a whole new appreciation of what these people were sacrificing. I mean, it was almost like there was no way you were going to possibly survive that attack, but yet they did and helped turn the tide of World War II. So as a history teacher, that certainly was one of the highlights.
That is really cool. Like, in all of these memories, those are things you hold with you forever. And I'm so glad that we're sharing this with our listeners. Well, for our listeners' sake, but also for mine. I'm living very vicariously through this whole conversation. So you have a lot of amazing memories. Were there specific places that you would deem as your favorite places that you visited?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Normandy area where the D-Day invasions happened, a place called Point de Hoc. That's where we were looking out from the German perspective in that. And then we went to the Normandy American Cemetery. And you see all the white crosses just lined up perfectly, no matter whatever angle you're looking at. And it's maintained by the United States. We have battlefield cemeteries all over Europe because of the number of people that had died and were buried right there in Europe and never actually came home. I would say any place in Paris was another favorite. I would go back to Paris any day. I have told people numerous times that if I could live in Paris, I would love to live in Paris. It's just an amazing place to be. But I've hit on a couple of the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame. Sacré-Cœur is another place. It's Sacred Heart. It's actually where plaster of Paris was actually first discovered. But it's just a really cool little place. There's a great little crepe place right at the bottom of it. And it's just a really nice place with great views. I touched on Versailles, but the palace at Versailles is just incredible. Not only the palace itself, but the gardens as well. I will tell you, I don't know that there ever is an off time, but if there's ever an off time you can get to Versailles, I would certainly recommend that. It's just a river of people, basically, is the best way to describe it. I mean, you're trying to stop in one room and it just like the river of people takes you and you just start going. And I mean, there's times that you're like, can't even stop in a room. The flow of people is just so great that it's like, yep, that was that room. And you just kind of go on to the next one and, maybe try to fight your way back, but it's like the salmon, trying to swim upstream. It's not going to be very easy. There's a place on the West Coast called Mont Saint Michel, which is a cool little place. It's actually at high tide, it's an island. At low tide, it's not an island. Literally, the roadway there gets covered over when there's a high tide. So at times, but it says it basically looks like it's floating out there in the sea. It's a really cool little place. You walk out there and there's an abbey up on the top of the hill and there's stores and all that, and a few people live there, and you just kind of wind your way around, and there's a bunch of shops and all that, and it's just a really neat little place to go, something I hadn't experienced anywhere else. Those are some of my favorite places to go, but really, you can't go wrong any place in France. I haven't found a place there that I did not like.
Since you've been multiple times, and what do you wish you had known before making any of your trips to France?
How to speak French. that would definitely be helpful. Although, like I said, the French people were much more fluent in English than I was in French. Just knowing more of it. I when they got down to nitty gritty details and all that, we would allow the tour director to take care of those types of things. But when we're out during the day and that, trying to order food, trying to buy something in the store, my little English French guidebook took me quite a ways, but they seem to appreciate the try. Even if I wasn't very good at it, they appreciated that I tried it. And yeah, you don't want to get the ugly American stereotype, which is us going over and thinking that they should all bend to our will and speak our language and all that. So yeah, you want to have at least a few key phrases in, even if you butcher them, even if you can't say them very well, at least you're trying, and they appreciate that.
Awesome. So that about wraps up our interview here. Thank you, Todd, for joining us. We appreciate all of your insight, and we hope our listeners did as well.
Thanks for tuning in to the Wanderlusting Wives podcast. Come escape with us again every other Tuesday. Give us a subscribe and a follow on all of our social media and wherever you listen to your podcasts. And until we chat next time, wander on.